The wagon lurched sideways into the ford, and Esther Prescott hit the brake too hard, sending a crate of railroad manifests tumbling into ankle-deep water as three riders crested the ridge behind her. It was late spring in 1869, and Coyote Gulch sat on the edge of everything that mattered, a high-desert ranch town where the railroad was coming through, and every deed suddenly had a price. Esther needed those manifests to prove her family's land claim before the new territorial judge signed off on Rathbone Ashford's forged paperwork. But the river was rising fast, and the wagon wheel was wedged between two rocks. The riders were closing, their hats low, and she recognized the glint of a badge on the lead man's vest. Brand Inspector.
Come on. Come on.
She yanked the brake lever again, and the wagon groaned but didn't budge. A shadow moved to her left, and a man in a dark gray vest and black cowboy hat dropped into the water beside her, boots splashing, his hand catching the wagon rail to steady it.
You planning to drown, or just make it easy for them?
His voice was low and rough, the kind that had seen too many hard miles. And when she turned, she saw blue eyes that were too sharp for comfort, and a jaw set like he was used to being shot at. Amos Garrett, the ex-outlaw everyone whispered about. The one who'd ridden with the Crowley gang until he'd turned himself in and served his time. The one who was supposed to be gone by now.
What are you doing here?
Saving your neck, if you stop arguing.
He leaned his weight against the wagon and shoved, muscles straining under his rolled sleeves, and the wheel scraped an inch forward. The riders were 200 yards out now, and coming fast.
Push on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Esther threw her shoulder into the wagon, and the wheel broke free with a lurch that sent her stumbling forward into his chest, his arm wrapping around her waist to keep her upright, their faces suddenly close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes and smell the dust and leather on his shirt.
I had it under control.
Sure you did.
His grin was crooked and infuriating, and he let go just as the wagon rolled forward into deeper water, the current catching it.
Get in. I'll drive.
You'll steal it.
I'll save it. Your call.
The riders shouted something she couldn't make out, and a rifle cracked, the bullet kicking up a spray of water 10 feet to their right. Esther grabbed the manifests, shoved them into her satchel, and vaulted into the wagon bed as Amos swung up onto the driver's bench and snapped the reins. The horses lunged forward, and the wagon plunged into the current, water sloshing over the sides, the wheels bouncing over submerged rocks as the far bank rushed closer. The far bank came up fast, and the wheels hit gravel with a jolt that nearly threw Esther out. But Amos hauled the horses left, and they burst up onto dry ground, the wagon fishtailing as he whipped the team into a gallop. The riders didn't follow. They sat on the far side of the ford, watching, and the lead man lifted something in his hand, a long, slim object that caught the light. A cane with a carved snake head. Rathbone Ashford.
He's not even chasing us.
He doesn't need to. He already knows where you're going.
Amos kept the horses at a hard run until the river disappeared behind a line of red rock ridges, then slowed to a trot and pulled off the trail into a stand of juniper trees. He set the brake and turned to look at her, his expression unreadable.
You want to tell me why a railroad clerk is running from a brand inspector with a satchel full of land manifests?
You want to tell me why an ex-outlaw is helping me instead of stealing my wagon?
Touché.
He climbed down and checked the horses, running his hands over their legs, and Esther slid out of the wagon bed, her dress clinging to her legs, her boots squelching. The sun was still high and hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer, and she could feel sweat mixing with river water on her neck.
We've got maybe an hour before they circle around and cut us off.
I need to get these manifests to the county seat before tomorrow morning. The new judge is signing off on land transfers at noon.
Ashford's land transfers.
How did you know?
Because I used to work for him. Before I went straight.
Esther's hand tightened on the satchel strap, and she took a step back, her mind racing through every rumor she'd ever heard about Amos Garrett. Every whispered story about the Crowley gang, and the stagecoach robberies, and the men who died.
You worked for Rathbone Ashford.
I rode for him. Didn't know what he was doing until it was too late. Then I turned myself in and did my time.
And now, you're here to finish the job.
Now I'm here to stop him.
He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his damp hair, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. The kind that came from carrying guilt too long.
He's been buying up land with forged deeds for 2 years. Uses his brand inspector badge to scare off the real owners, then files the paperwork before anyone can fight it. He's got half the panhandle under his name, and the railroad's paying him a fortune for the right-of-way.
How do you know all this?
Because I found his ledger. Kept a copy before I left. It's in my saddlebag.
He gestured toward a paint horse tied in the trees, and Esther's heart kicked against her ribs.
Why didn't you turn it in?
Because nobody believes an ex-outlaw. But they'll believe a railroad clerk.
The pieces clicked together in her head, and she wanted to laugh or scream, or both.
You were waiting for me at the ford.
I was waiting for anyone brave enough or desperate enough to run. You were both.
A branch snapped behind them, and Amos had his revolver out before Esther could turn, his body stepping in front of hers. But it was just a mule deer bounding through the brush. He holstered the gun and let out a breath.
We need to move.
Where?
The county fair's in full swing 2 miles north. Lots of people, lots of chaos. We can lose them there and figure out our next move.
Or get trapped in a crowd.
You got a better idea?
She didn't. She hitched up her skirt and climbed back into the wagon, and Amos swung up beside her, his shoulder brushing hers as he took the reins. The contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the way he'd stepped in front of that imagined threat without hesitation. The way his hand had steadied her in the river. The way he smelled like leather and sun and something wild she couldn't name.
If you're lying to me, I'll shoot you myself.
Fair enough.
He grinned and snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled forward into the golden afternoon light. The county fair sprawled across a flat stretch of grassland, like a traveling circus had collided with a cattle auction. Canvas tents flapping in the hot breeze, dust rising from the makeshift corrals where men were shouting bets on a roping contest. Esther could smell roasting meat and tobacco smoke and horse sweat, could hear fiddle music and laughter, and the crack of a starting pistol somewhere in the chaos. Amos drove the wagon straight into the thick of it and pulled up beside a row of vendor stalls, setting the brake.
Stay close. Don't let anyone see that satchel.
I know how to be careful.
You got chased into a river an hour ago.
Because you showed up and made it worse.
I saved your life.
You made me drop a crate.
I'll buy you a new one.
He hopped down and held out a hand to help her, and she ignored it and jumped down on her own, landing hard enough that her boots kicked up dust. His grin widened.
Stubborn.
Principled.
Same thing.
They moved through the crowd, Amos keeping one hand hovering near the small of her back without quite touching, steering her around a group of drovers and past a tent where a man was selling dubious elixirs. Esther scanned the faces, looking for anyone who moved wrong, anyone who watched too long.
What's the plan?
Find the judge. He's supposed to be here today, giving a speech about reforms.
Ashford said the judge disappeared.
Ashford lied. Judge is staying at the hotel in town, but he's making appearances to win votes.
They rounded a tent and nearly collided with a woman in a blue calico dress, carrying a basket of ribbons. And Amos caught Esther's elbow to steady her. His fingers warmed through the damp fabric of her sleeve.
You seem to know a lot about the judge's schedule.
I've been tracking him for 2 weeks.
That's not suspicious at all.
Says the woman running from the law with stolen documents.
They're not stolen. They're evidence.
Semantics.
A shout went up from the roping ring and the crowd surged forward, pushing Esther and Amos together against the side of a wagon. She was suddenly pressed against his chest again, his arm bracing against the wagon bed behind her to keep the crowd from crushing her. And she could feel his heartbeat through his vest, steady and strong.
You all right?
Fine.
Her voice came out breathless, and she hated it. He smelled like river water and dust, and something darker. Something that made her think of midnight rides, and campfire smoke and trouble. His blue eyes searched her face, and for a second she thought he might say something, might close the gap between them. But then a man's voice cut through the noise. Amos Garrett. Didn't expect to see you here. Amos went rigid, and his hand dropped to his gun, and Esther turned to see a tall man in a black suit and string tie, his silver hair slicked back, his face lined with too much sun and not enough kindness. He carried a polished cane with a carved snake head, and he was tapping it lightly against his palm. Rathbone Ashford.
Ashford.
Amos kept his voice flat, and his hand didn't move from his gun. Ashford smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes, and tapped the snakehead cane against the ground twice. I don't believe we've met, Miss Prescott. My name is Rathbone Ashford. I'm the brand inspector for this territory.
I know who you are.
Ashford's smile widened, and he glanced at Amos. Then, back to Esther. I hear you've been asking questions about land deeds. Dangerous hobby for a young woman.
She's not interested in your hobbies, Ashford.
Ashford tapped the cane once more, a sharp crack against the dirt, and 2 men stepped out of the crowd behind him, both wearing badges, both carrying rifles. I'm afraid Miss Prescott is going to have to come with me. There's been a complaint filed about stolen railroad property.
That's a lie.
Of course it's a lie. But it's a legal lie, and that's all that matters. Now, if you'll hand over the satchel.
Not happening.
Ashford sighed and shook his head, and the cane tapped again, 3 times fast. Amos, you're a free man now. You've served your time. Don't throw it away for a girl you just met.
I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finishing what I started.
Ashford's expression went cold, and the tapping stopped. Then, you're both under arrest. The 2 deputies raised their rifles, and the crowd started to scatter, women grabbing children, men backing away, and Esther's heart slammed into her throat. Amos moved without warning, his hand closing around her wrist as he yanked her sideways into the gap between 2 tents, pulling her into a run. Rifle shots cracked behind them, and canvas tore. And then they were sprinting through the chaos, dodging tent stakes and overturned crates. the satchel bouncing against Esther's hip as she ran.
This way.
Amos pulled her left toward the livestock pens, and they vaulted over a low fence into a corral full of milling cattle. The animals scattered with panicked bellows, and Esther nearly lost her footing in the churned mud. But Amos caught her around the waist and hauled her upright, his arms solid and sure.
Where are we going?
Anywhere that's not here.
They scrambled over the far fence and landed in a narrow alley between vendor stalls, and Amos pressed her against the canvas wall, his body shielding hers, his breathing hard. She could feel the heat of him, the tension coiled in his shoulders. And when he looked down at her, his eyes were fierce and bright.
You trust me?
No.
Smart woman.
He grinned and kissed her forehead fast, a brief press of lips that left her stunned. And then he grabbed her hand and pulled her back into motion. They burst out into the main thoroughfare and collided with a group of men hauling a wooden platform for the evening dance. And the whole structure tipped sideways with a crash that sent splinters flying. Amos shoved Esther under the platform and dove in after her, rolling them both into the narrow gap between the wood and the ground. Boots thundered past, voices shouting, and Esther bit her lip to keep from laughing because this was insane. All of it. And she was pressed hip to hip with an ex-outlaw in the dirt under a dance platform while half the county hunted them.
You're smiling.
I'm terrified.
Same thing.
His face was inches from hers, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners, and she realized he was smiling too.
You kissed me.
I did.
Why?
Felt right.
Her heart was pounding so hard, she thought he could probably hear it, and she wanted to kiss him back. Wanted it so badly, it scared her. But footsteps were coming closer, and voices were shouting orders, and Amos pressed a finger to her lips, his expression going serious. They held still, barely breathing, as the deputies searched the area. Esther could see Boots through the gap, could hear Ashford's voice giving commands, could hear the tap-tap-tap of that snakehead cane. Check under there. A shadow fell across the gap, and Amos tensed, his hand moving to his gun. But then, a fiddle started playing somewhere nearby, and a woman laughed, and the shadow moved away. Ashford's voice faded, and the Boots retreated.
Stay here.
Amos slid out from under the platform, and Esther grabbed his wrist.
Don't leave me.
I'm getting us a way out. 2 minutes.
He was gone before she could argue, and she pressed herself flat against the dirt, the satchel digging into her ribs, her breath coming short. The sun was lower now, the light turning orange, and she could smell roasting corn and hear the fiddle picking up tempo. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. Panic started to crawl up her spine, and she was about to slide out and run when a hand reached under the platform, and she nearly screamed before she recognized the gray wool vest.
Come on.
She grabbed his hand, and he pulled her out into the open, and she saw he'd brought 2 horses, a paint and a bay, both saddled and ready.
You stole horses.
Borrowed.
That's still a crime.
Add it to the list.
He boosted her into the saddle and swung up onto the paint, and they kicked the horses into a gallop, weaving through the fair and out onto the open trail. The sun was sinking fast now, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink, and the air smelled like sage and dust. Esther looked back once and saw riders forming up at the edge of the fair, Ashford's tall figure unmistakable in his black suit, the cane raised like a commander's baton.
We need to lose them. before dark.
How?
Old trail I know. Cuts through the canyon.
And if it's a dead end?
Then, we make a stand.
He said it like he meant it, like he'd done it before. And Esther realized she believed him. She kicked the bay into a harder run and followed him off the main trail into a narrow gap between red rock walls, the horse's hooves echoing off stone. The canyon was cooler, the air still, and the light was fading fast. They rode for 20 minutes in silence, the walls closing in until they were riding single file. And then the canyon opened into a small basin with a spring and a ring of cottonwood trees. Amos dismounted and helped her down, his hands steady on her waist.
We'll camp here tonight. They won't find us in the dark.
And in the morning?
We ride for the county seat. Get those manifests to the judge before Ashford can stop us.
Esther nodded and sank down onto a flat rock by the spring, pulling the satchel into her lap. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline draining away, and she realized how close they'd come to being caught, how close she'd come to losing everything. Amos knelt beside her and pulled a canteen from his saddlebag, offering it.
Drink.
She drank, and the water was cool and clean, and when she handed it back, their fingers brushed, and he didn't pull away.
You did good today.
I nearly got us killed.
But you didn't.
He sat beside her on the rock and pulled off his hat, running a hand through his hair, and in the fading light she could see the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes.
Why are you really doing this?
Because I owe it to the people Ashford hurt. Because I can't undo what I did when I rode for him, but I can stop him from doing it again.
That's not enough.
Maybe I'm doing it because a stubborn railroad clerk with green eyes and a death wish made me remember what it felt like to care about something.
Her breath caught, and she turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw the honesty in his eyes, the hope and the fear mixed together.
I don't have a death wish.
You ran from armed deputies.
Because you told me to.
You trusted me.
I must be out of my mind.
He laughed, low and rough, and she laughed too, and then somehow they were kissing, his hand sliding into her hair, her fingers gripping his vest, and it was nothing like the quick press to her forehead earlier. This was slow and deep and hungry, tasting like dust and water, and something sweeter, something that felt like a promise. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, foreheads resting together, and Esther's heart was racing for entirely different reasons now.
We should keep moving.
I know.
But neither of them moved for another long moment, and when they finally stood and gathered their things, Esther felt something shift between them, something that made the danger ahead feel less overwhelming, because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. They rode together now, his arms steady around her waist, and she let herself lean back against his chest and feel safe for the first time since this whole mess started. The settlement of Coyote Gulch appeared as the sun touched the horizon, a scatter of wooden buildings huddled around a dusty main street with the railway office at the far end.
Ashford will have men watching your office.
Then we go in the back. I have a key to the storage room.
And if someone sees us,
Then we run. Again.
you're getting good at that.
I have a good teacher.
They dismounted a quarter-mile out and led the horse on foot through the scrub, circling wide to approach the railway office from behind. The building was dark, the windows shuttered, and Esther's hands shook as she fumbled with the key to the storage room door.
Easy. I'm watching the street.
The lock clicked, and they slipped inside, closing the door behind them. The storage room smelled like paper and dust and machine oil. And Esther moved by touch in the darkness until she found the shelf where she kept the duplicate ledger. Her fingers closed around the leather spine, and she pulled it free, holding it tight against her chest like a shield.
Got it.
Good. Now we need proof of the forged deeds.
Those will be in the main office, in the lockbox, under the desk.
Can you open it?
If I still have my key.
She felt in her skirt pocket, and her fingers found the small brass key she'd carried for 2 years, and relief flooded through her. They moved through the connecting door into the main office, and moonlight spilled through the front window, painting everything in silver and shadow. Esther knelt behind the desk and opened the lockbox, pulling out a thick bundle of folded papers tied with string. She untied them with trembling fingers and spread them on the desk. And even in the dim light, she could see the discrepancies, the 2 perfect signatures, the dates that didn't match the official registry.
This is it. This proves Ashford forged the transfers.
Then, we take it to the territorial judge.
The judge disappeared 2 weeks ago, remember?
Then we take it to the federal marshal in Amarillo.
That's 3 days' ride.
We'll make it 2.
A board creaked outside on the porch and they both froze. Esther's heart slammed against her ribs as heavy footsteps crossed the planks. And then a shadow moved past the window.
Out the back. Now.
They gathered the ledger and the deeds and ran for the storage room. But before they reached the door, the front window exploded inward in a shower of glass, and a man's voice shouted. Ashford's deputy, the one with the scar, vaulted through the broken window with his gun drawn, and Amos shoved Esther toward the back door and turned to face him.
Run!
Not without you!
I'll be right behind you! Go!
Esther ran, clutching the papers to her chest, her boots pounding across the storage room floor. She burst out the back door into the alley and nearly collided with another deputy, this one younger with a thin mustache. And he grabbed for her arm, but she twisted away and swung the ledger at his head. The heavy book connected with a satisfying thud, and he staggered back, cursing, and Esther ran for the street. Behind her, she heard gunfire, 2 sharp cracks that made her stomach drop. And then Amos was beside her, breathing hard, blood running down his left arm.
You're hit!
Just grazed. Keep moving.
They ran down the main street with shouts rising behind them, and Esther saw faces in windows, saw the barkeep from the saloon step out onto the porch with a shotgun, saw a woman pull her children inside and slam the door. The horse was where they'd left it, tied to a hitching post behind the general store, and Amos swung into the saddle and hauled Esther up in front of him. His injured arm wrapped around her waist, and she felt the wetness of blood soaking through her dress, but there was no time to stop. No time to think. He kicked the horse into a gallop, and they tore out of town with the sound of pursuit rising like thunder behind them.
Where are we going?
Away from here.
They'll follow us.
I know.
Your arm, Amos. You need to stop and let me wrap it.
Can't stop yet.
The horse galloped hard for 2 miles before Amos finally reined it in, turning off the main trail and heading into the scrub. They rode another half-mile in the darkness, navigating by moonlight, and finally stopped in a dry wash sheltered by overhanging rock. Amos dismounted and nearly fell, his left arm hanging useless at his side, and Esther slid down and caught him by the elbow.
Sit down before you pass out.
I'm fine.
You're bleeding all over me. Sit down.
He sat on a flat rock, and she tore a strip from her petticoat, her hands shaking as she wrapped his arm. The wound was a deep graze along his bicep. Ugly, but not life-threatening. And she tied the makeshift bandage tight, and then just stood there, looking at him, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall.
You could have been killed.
So, could you?
This is insane.
Yeah,
We're going to die out here.
not if I can help it.
She laughed, a shaky sound that was half sob. And then she was kissing him again, desperate and clumsy, tasting salt and dust and the copper tang of blood. And he pulled her down onto his lap with his good arm and held her like she was the only thing keeping him upright. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his and closed her eyes.
I'm sorry I got you into this.
I got myself into it.
I should never have asked you to help.
I would have helped anyway,
Why?
because you looked at me like I was worth saving.
Her breath hitched, and she cupped his face in both hands, her thumbs brushing his cheekbones, and saw the truth in his eyes. The years of guilt and shame and loneliness that he'd been carrying alone.
You are worth saving.
So are you.
They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped together in the darkness. And then practical necessity reasserted itself, and Esther climbed off his lap and helped him to his feet.
We need a plan.
We ride for Amarillo at first light.
Ashford will have men on every trail.
Then we go cross-country.
Through the Canyonlands?
You have a better idea?
No.
Then we do it.
They slept in shifts that night, taking turns keeping watch. And when dawn broke pink and gold over the eastern horizon, they were already moving. The Canyonlands were a maze of red rock and dry washes, treacherous terrain even for experienced riders. But Amos had run cattle through here in his outlaw days, and he knew the hidden trails, the springs where water could be found, the narrow passes that could hide a rider from pursuit. They rode hard through the morning, the sun climbing hot and merciless overhead, and by midday, Esther's lips were cracked and her throat burned with thirst.
There's a spring 2 miles ahead.
Can we make it?
We have to.
The horse was flagging, its head drooping, foam crusting white on its neck. Esther could feel its ribs heaving beneath her legs, and she knew they were pushing it too hard. But there was no choice. Behind them, somewhere in the twisting canyons, Ashford's men were hunting, and if they stopped, they were dead. The spring appeared like a miracle. A green oasis, tucked into a narrow canyon, with cottonwood trees shading a pool of clear water. They dismounted and let the horse drink, and Esther knelt beside the pool and scooped water into her mouth with shaking hands. It tasted like heaven.
We can rest here. An hour.
What if they find us?
Then we run again.
I'm so tired of running.
I know.
He sat beside her, and she leaned against his shoulder, too exhausted to care about propriety or appearances, and closed her eyes. His good arm came around her, and she felt his lips press against her hair, gentle and lingering.
When this is over, I'm going to build you a house with a real kitchen and a porch where you can sit and watch the sunset without worrying about who's coming up the road.
That sounds nice.
And I'm going to marry you, if you'll have me.
Her eyes flew open, and she sat up to look at him, searching his face for any sign that he was joking. But he was deadly serious, his blue eyes steady on hers.
You're asking me to marry you?
I'm saying I want to. When this is over, if we live,
That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard.
you've heard others?
No.
Then, it's the most romantic too.
She laughed despite everything, despite the danger and the fear and the exhaustion, and kissed him hard.
Yes.
Yes? She and the warned Randant Rekthing, one Souter said, they were place at the time. The warned the wind stas but that we year and lut coins. Or yes, with a lost lots mark Pogan. Yes, the waist bone frest in the teaching nine ties. The head had barred fire. They called it fire. The wind finally was pay for a Christ it's walking.
Yes. I'll marry you. When this is over. If we live.
We'll live.
Promise?
Promise.
They rested for an hour, and then rode on, climbing out of the canyon into open grassland that stretched empty and golden under the afternoon sun. Esther scanned the horizon constantly, looking for the telltale dust cloud that would mean riders. But the land was still and silent, except for the whisper of wind through the dry grass. By evening, they'd covered 20 miles, and Amos estimated they were halfway to Amarillo. They made camp in a stand of mesquite trees, building no fire for fear of giving away their position, and ate jerky and hardtack from Amos's saddlebag.
Tell me about your family.
Not much to tell. My father died when I was 12. My mother remarried and moved to Missouri. I haven't seen her in 10 years.
Do you miss her?
Sometimes.
You should write to her. When this is over.
Maybe I will. What about you?
My parents are dead. I had an older brother, but he was killed in the war.
I'm sorry.
It was a long time ago.
Still.
She leaned against him and looked up at the stars, bright and countless overhead, and felt a strange peace settle over her despite everything. Tomorrow, they would reach Amarillo. Tomorrow, they would find the marshal and hand over the evidence, and it would be out of their hands. Tomorrow, Ashford would be arrested, and the nightmare would be over. She let herself believe it, just for tonight.
Amos?
Yeah?
I'm glad you came back to Coyote Gulch.
Me too.
They slept, wrapped in a single blanket, her back to his chest, his good arm around her waist, and for the first time in days, Esther slept, without dreaming of gunfire and burning buildings. She woke to the sound of hoofbeats and sat up so fast she nearly knocked Amos in the chin. He was already awake, his hand on his gun, his eyes fixed on the eastern horizon, where a line of riders appeared out of the dawn light.
Get on the horse.
How many?
6. Maybe more.
Can we outrun them?
We're going to try.
They mounted and kicked the horse into a gallop. But the animal was exhausted from 2 days of hard riding, and it couldn't maintain the pace. The riders behind them were gaining, closing the distance with every stride. And Esther could see the glint of sun on gun barrels, could hear the shouts carrying across the open ground.
Hold tight.
He turned the horse sharply, heading for a dry riverbed that cut across the plain like a scar. And they plunged down the steep bank in a controlled slide that sent rocks and dirt flying. The horse stumbled at the bottom but recovered, and Amos urged it forward along the riverbed, using the banks for cover. Behind them, the riders reached the edge and started down, but the steep descent slowed them and bought precious seconds. The riverbed twisted and turned, and around one bend Amos saw what he'd been hoping for. a place where the bank had collapsed and formed a natural ramp up to the opposite side.
We're going up.
They'll see us.
Can't be helped.
He drove the horse up the ramp, and they burst out onto level ground again, and now they could see Amarillo in the distance, a sprawl of buildings shimmering in the morning heat. They were close, so close, but the riders were right behind them and closing fast. A gunshot cracked, and Esther felt the bullet whip past her ear. And then Amos was leaning low over the horse's neck, his body shielding hers, and the town was getting bigger, closer, the individual buildings resolving out of the heat shimmer.
Almost there.
Don't get killed.
Wasn't planning on it.
They galloped into Amarillo's main street, and people scattered, shouting, diving for cover. Amos reined the horse to a sliding stop in front of a building with a sign that read Federal Marshal, and they tumbled out of the saddle together, just as the pursuing riders thundered into view.
Inside.
They burst through the door and nearly collided with a tall man in a badge and a black coat, and Esther thrust the ledger and the bundle of deeds into his hands.
Rathbone Ashford is framing ranchers with forged deeds. This is the proof. He's outside with 6 armed men, and he's trying to kill us.
The marshal, a grizzled man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes, took one look at the papers, and then at the riders pulling up outside, and his expression hardened. He turned and shouted to his deputies, and within seconds 4 men with rifles appeared from a back room. The marshal, whose name was Clayton Hayes, stepped out onto the porch with his rifle in hand and his deputies flanking him. Hayes raised his voice, calm and hard. Ashford's men hesitated, their horses dancing nervously. And then one of them, the scarred deputy who'd come through the window in Coyote Gulch, spat and turned his horse around. The others followed, riding slowly back the way they'd come, and Hayes watched them go with a grim smile. Inside, Esther sank onto a bench and started shaking, the adrenaline draining out of her all at once, and Amos sat beside her and pulled her against his side. Hayes came back in and spread the papers on his desk, reading quickly, his expression growing darker with every page. Hayes looked up at them.
He's a brand inspector. Been operating in the Panhandle for 2 years.
Hayes tapped the papers. Hayes stood and buckled on his gun belt. Hayes and his deputies rode out within the hour, and Amos and Esther stayed in Amarillo, too exhausted to do anything but find a room at the hotel and sleep for 16 hours straight. When they woke, it was evening, and the town was buzzing with news. Hayes had arrested Ashford without a fight, catching him in his office in Coyote Gulch with a stack of forged deeds and a ledger that matched Esther's records perfectly. The snakehead cane had been confiscated as evidence. 3 of Ashford's deputies had also been arrested, and the rest had scattered. The ranchers who'd been forced off their land were already filing claims to get it back.
It's over.
It's over.
They stood on the hotel balcony watching the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Esther felt something tight in her chest finally loosen.
What do we do now?
I guess we go back to Coyote Gulch and plan a wedding.
A simple one.
After the roundup.
Spring roundup is in March.
That gives us 4 months.
Think we can stay out of trouble that long?
Probably not.
She laughed and he kissed her, slow and sweet, with the sunset painting them in gold. And for the first time in years, Esther felt like she had a future to look forward to. They returned to Coyote Gulch the next day, riding slowly this time, with no one chasing them. The townspeople greeted them like heroes, and the railroad office welcomed Esther back with relief and apologies. Amos found work at the livery stable, honest work that paid fair wages, and moved into a room above the smithy. But most nights, he was at Esther's little house behind the railway office, helping her repair the damage from Ashford's deputies and talking about plans for the future. One evening in late November, with wildflowers blooming in the fields and a warm breeze blowing through the open windows, they sat together at her kitchen table with flour on their hands from making biscuits.
March is too far away.
You want to move it up?
I want to get married next week.
Next week?
Why wait?
Your friends will want to plan something.
I don't need something big. I just need you.
He looked at her across the flour-dusted table, her green eyes bright and certain, her hair coming loose from its braid, and felt his heart turn over in his chest.
All right.
All right?
Next week. Simple ceremony. Just us and whoever wants to come.
And then?
And then, I build you that house with the porch.
And we live happily ever after?
Something like that.
She grinned and leaned across the table to kiss him, getting flour on his face, and he kissed her back and didn't care. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wedding took place the following Saturday in the small church at the edge of town, with the preacher officiating and half of Coyote Gulch in attendance. Esther wore a simple cream-colored dress she'd borrowed from the dressmaker, and Amos wore his best vest and a new shirt. And when they stood together at the altar and said their vows, his voice was steady and sure.
I promise to love you and protect you and build you that house with the porch.
I promise to love you and trust you and never let you face trouble alone.
The preacher pronounced them husband and wife. And when Amos kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in cheers. They celebrated with a simple supper at the hotel, with music and dancing that lasted until midnight. And when they finally slipped away to the little house behind the railway office, Esther felt like she was floating. Inside, Amos lit the lamps, and Esther took the flowers from her hair and set them on the table. The house was small and simple, just 2 rooms and a kitchen. But it was theirs now, and that made it feel like a palace.
So this is married life.
Seems pretty good so far.
Wait until you see me in the morning.
I've seen you covered in dust and blood and running for your life. I think I can handle your morning hair.
She laughed and pulled him close, her arms around his neck, and kissed him slowly.
I love you, Amos Garrett.
I love you too, Esther Garrett.
They stood together in the lamplight, wrapped in each other's arms. And outside the window, the prairie stretched away into the darkness, peaceful and quiet. Tomorrow, they would start planning the house, measuring out the plot of land Amos had claimed just west of town, deciding on the size of the porch and the placement of the windows. Tomorrow, they would begin their new life together, building something that would last. But tonight, they were just 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had survived danger and fear and come out stronger on the other side, who had chosen each other and meant it. Amos kissed her again, slowly and deeply, and she melted into him. All the fear and tension of the past days finally leaving her body.
You know what the best part is?
What?
We get to do this every day for the rest of our lives.
Wake up together. Work together. Fight together.
Hopefully a little less fighting.
I make no promises.
He laughed and picked her up, spinning her around once, and she shrieked with laughter and held on tight. When he set her down, she was dizzy and breathless and happier than she had ever been in her life. They moved to the small bedroom, Amos carrying the lamp, and Esther pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. He watched her with quiet intensity, and she felt beautiful under his gaze, wanted and cherished and safe.
I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this.
I already don't.
She crossed to him and took his hands, lacing their fingers together.
We're going to build something good here, Amos. A home. A life. Something that lasts.
Together.
Together.
He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips, gentle and reverent. And she closed her eyes and let herself fall into the moment, into the warmth and the promise of everything that lay ahead. Outside, the prairie night was soft and quiet, the stars bright overhead, and inside the little cabin, two people who had survived danger and deception and come out stronger, held each other close, and began their new life together. Colorized late 1800s American West photograph